So we're in Proverbs, and we're just going through different themes that we find in Proverbs, and it's Labor Day weekend. I got confused this week and started working on next Sunday's message because I had my dates all confused. But anyway, it's Labor Day, and Proverbs has a lot to say about labor. And so it would be a mistake not to preach on that when I'm in Proverbs and have that theme coming up anyway. So we're going to look at that theme of labor and work and laziness and all those kind of things. Proverbs chapter 10, verse 4 says, "Lazy hands make for poverty, but diligent hands bring wealth. He who gathers crops in summer is a prudent son, but he who sleeps during harvest is a disgraceful son." Now, Proverbs uses the analogy, or he uses the sluggard to illustrate laziness. Now, what comes to mind when you think of a sluggard? A sluggard is a small worm-like mollusk. It's kind of related to the snail. It lives in water. It doesn't have any vertebrae. And it has a spiral shell that it kind of likes to retreat into and withdraw into. So Proverbs, when Proverbs is talking to us about laziness, it's really talking about a man that is kind of like, doesn't have a spine, or wants to withdraw or retreat from their responsibilities from what they should be doing. So laziness is more than just a lack of ambition. It can be a lack of having backbone when you need backbone. It might be a lack of having determination to press on when you need to press on. It might be just a lack of spine or perseverance. Now, the Holman Bible Dictionary equates laziness with idleness or not being fully engaged in earning a living. And that creates a good metaphor for us, or a good illustration, word picture for us, on farm machinery. If the gears are not fully engaged, you run into problems. If they're out here and they're just barely engaged, pretty soon you're wearing off the ends of the gears and you're causing problems and things just are not working right. But when they're fully engaged, you're accomplishing what you're supposed to be doing when those gears are fully engaged and all of that. And so a lot of times we can end up in a lot of problems if we're not fully engaged with life or in our work or the things that you and I are supposed to be fully engaged at. And that might be work for some of us. That might be fully engaged at home. Some people are really good. They're fully engaged at work, but they get home and the gears just aren't touching. They're not engaged when they get there. Other people are really engaged with relationships, and other people are carrying on a conversation while they're really focused on their cell phone. Some people are not fully engaged in church or in marriage or in raising their children. And that's kind of what Proverbs is speaking to us about, that we need to be fully engaged in the things that you and I are called to be engaged at this point in our lives. Instead of creating excuses, we need to understand that there's a cost to being lazy with the things that you and I have been called to. Laziness might be staying busy doing what is preferable to us. Maybe not so important, but it's what we want to do instead of the thing that we know we should be doing. The thing that is going to be the most important thing, the thing that's going to help us down the road, that's going to make us effective and productive. Now, I'm talking about something that every one of us fails at. Every one of us at some point in our life, we're doing what is preferable and easy and what we just want to do instead of the thing that's really going to help us long term. The thing that's really important for us to do. And so we have to be careful about that. Laziness sometimes is just doing what's preferable to us, and we just go find our comfort zone instead of doing the hard thing that we need to be doing. Bob Green says, anytime you want something or say you want something, but either you don't take steps to accomplish that or you act in direct opposition to that, you're just being lazy. When you say you want something and you do things that keep you from getting that thing, you're being lazy, he says. So another thing that Proverbs tells us from Proverbs 26, verses 13 through 16, listen to this. The sluggard says, there's a lion in the road and a fierce lion roaming the streets. Well, first of all, he's making excuses and he's saying, man, there's danger here and there's this and that and something else. And so he says, the sluggard says, can always find an excuse for not doing what we should be doing. And then he goes on and he says, sometimes we just sleep when we should be awake. And he says, as the door turns on its hinges, so a sluggard turns on his bed. And then he says, the sluggard buries his hand in the dish. He is too lazy to bring it back to his mouth. I love the pictures when Eli falls asleep eating his food, head plops right in the food and all of that. But it gives a picture of us when we get older and we just get lazy and we don't follow through on what we're supposed to do. And the last thing he says here in Proverbs 26, verse 16, the sluggard is wiser in his own eyes than 7 men who answer discreetly. And so sometimes our pride, a lazy person will just think they know more than everyone else, and what they're doing is right, and they're just kind of arrogant in that. So there's always an excuse for laziness, but sometimes we need to stop and consider what is the consequence of the excuse? What is the consequence of the choices that we make? There was a visitor that went to Rome to visit the Vatican, and he was so impressed with the beauty and the power and just everything about the Vatican. He was just so impressed, and Pope John was there at the time, and he got to meet Pope John, and so he asked Pope John this question. He said, how many people do you have working here? And if you remember Pope John, he had kind of a sense of humor, and he had a twinkle in his eye in his response. He said, about half of them. Well, there's results that come with laziness. Proverbs chapter 6, verses 6 through 11 is the famous one that we all think of. How long will you lie there, you sluggard? When will you get up from your sleep? A little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands to rest, and poverty will come on you like a thief, and scarcity like an armed man. So the sluggard, the lazy person, is wasteful. He doesn't prepare for, he doesn't create for the future opportunities that come. We're busy serving our immediate interests, and sometimes serving our immediate interests today keep us a long ways from meeting interests that we'll have later on in life. And so the question for us today is, what are we doing today that will help us 5 years from now? What are we doing today that will help us in 10 years spiritually? How are we doing? What's going to help us spiritually down the road? What are we doing physically today? Are we doing some things physically that are either going to hurt us or help us? Yes, if you're lazy, it's real easy to do things that are going to hurt you. It's a challenge to do things that are going to help you down the road physically or financially. What are you doing that's going to help you down the road, or socially in your relationships and all of that? Proverbs 18 verse 9 says, one who is slack in his work is a brother to one who destroys. If we're being lazy, there's a destructive element among us. And it really means that materials are being wasted, or talents, or resources, or spiritual gifts. They just go to ruin. We've got them, God's given them to us, but we don't do what we could with them. We we just don't take advantage of what God has given to us, and we're not being good stewards when we're being lazy. Proverbs 21, verses 25 and 26 says, "The sluggard's cravings will be the death of him, because his hands refuse to work. All day long he craves for more, but the righteous give without sparing." So one of the things he's saying there is that when we are lazy, we still have desires. We still want what everyone else wants, who is being industrious and working hard. We all have the desires. But if we're lazy, those desires those desires keep feeding and gnawing at us, and eventually we break one of the commandments by coveting what we're not willing to work for. And then we might steal, we might do all kinds of other things to get what we haven't worked for to get for ourselves. And so we have to be careful about that. And so Solomon is saying we have to have a work ethic that matches with our desires and bring those to an alignment. Proverbs 24, verses 30 through 34, Solomon says, "I went past a field of the sluggard, past the vineyard of a man who lacks judgment. Thorns had come up everywhere. The ground was covered with weeds, and the stone wall was in ruins. I applied my heart to what I observed, and I learned a lesson from what I saw." And he repeats what he had said earlier in Proverbs. "A little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands to rest, and poverty will come on you like a bandit, and scarcity like an armed man." So for the lazy person, as a general principle, poverty and scarcity can sneak up on us. But the sluggard is not the only animal that Solomon talks about. He speaks about the ant. And in Proverbs chapter 6, he says this, "Go to the ant, you sluggard. Consider its ways and be wise. It has no commander, no overseer, no ruler. Yet it stores its provisions in summer and gathers its food at harvest." Now the ant, without direction, without human faculties, knows when to work, and it just keeps busy all summer long. It knows when to relax. It just has that sense about it. And if the ant does that, if the ant works and stores up and gets ready for winter, how much more should we? And it's not always convenient. In fact, a lot of times it's not convenient. Summer's hot, but the ant's out there working away, lifting 50 times this weight, carrying things and working along with other ants. And so the question for us is, how often do I have to be pushed or driven to do what I really need to do? And how many times do I, just like the ant, buckle down and just go do it? Ants just keep working and persevering like a little army. Eliot said, "Perseverance is not a long race. It's many short races, one after another." Perseverance is also the ability to see beyond the moment, to see beyond what I just want today. It is to persist in difficulties. Romans chapter 5, verses 3 through 4 says, "Difficulty produces perseverance." If you've never had any challenges, you'll never develop perseverance. Perseverance produces character, and character produces hope. And you stop and think about it. Laziness robs us of all of those things. We're too lazy to go through difficulties, so we don't develop any character and perseverance, and then we don't have any hope at the end. And so we have to keep all of that in mind. Proverbs 22, verse 29 says, "Do you see a man who's skilled at his work? He will serve before kings. He will not serve before obscure men." Now, character involves becoming as skilled as you can. Some people are naturally just have a lot more natural talent at different things. And we all got our areas where we're just naturally talented at. Margaret comes from a family of just raw, natural talent musically. But I'll guarantee she couldn't play like she does if she hadn't done some work. Some hard work that I've never been willing to put in. So you have to combine those two elements. And I think of Corrine and all the decorating, the natural ability she has to see what goes together and put things together. But she also does a lot of work with that. It just doesn't magically appear in the church. So all of that kind of stuff, character involves becoming skilled at the things God has naturally gifted you at. And you'll never become skilled at anything you do without some character, without persevering in tough times. Proverbs 27 verses 23 and 24 says, "Be sure you know the condition of your flocks. Give careful attention to your herds. For riches do not endure forever, and a crown is not secure for all generations." So the passage really calls us to be good stewards, to stay on top of our responsibilities. And some of you are retired. Many of you. Work is not your thing, but you have some responsibilities. You have some things that God wants you to focus on at this point in your life. What are you doing there? And are you being fully engaged and being a good steward of the responsibilities that God has given to you at this stage in your life? Staying on top of those responsibilities regardless of your age. It might be school if you're young. It might be work. It might be church. It might be private lessons. It might be any number of things that God has called you to. It might be a special relationship, or it might be a person that you want to impact, or God's called you to impact. And so being a good steward of all of that. Margaret Thatcher was prime minister in Britain when Ronald Reagan was president, and I love listening to her. And one of the things she said one time was, "I think I have a flair for politics. But natural feelings are never enough. You've got to marry those natural feelings with really hard work. But hard work comes more easily if you're doing the things you want to do." So there's some wisdom I want to just share with you about work. And one is know when to do what. Develop that sense that there's a time and a place. Ecclesiastes, again written by Solomon, says there's a time and a place for everything. There's a time to cry and a time to rejoice, a time to plant and a time to harvest, a time to relax and a time to work. There's a time for everything. And part of using wisdom at work is knowing what season it is in your life and knowing what you should be doing at this point in your life. And one of the general principles that we see again and again throughout Scripture is you can pay now so you can play later, or you can play now and end up paying later. And that's just a general principle that flows through Scripture, and we see it again and again. And yet in our culture, one of our problems, I think, in our culture is that everybody wants to play now, and they're just hoping they never get around to footing the bill. That's our government. That's everywhere you go in our culture. And Solomon is saying, no, you've got to think this through. You've got to know when to do what and organize things that way. Proverbs 24 verse 27 says, "Finish your outdoor work and get your fields ready. After that, build your house." I think of some of those pioneers that worked so hard, came across rugged, dangerous times, and built farms and farmsteads and all of that, and some of the atrocious things that they went through in those first hard winters, and many of them died, and the mud huts that they built and sod huts that they built and all that kind of stuff. But they came out and they, pursuing a great life out here, they went to all kinds of hard work to make that happen. And many of them followed this advice, finishing their outdoor work and trying to set things up for another year before they worried about their house and all of that. Sometimes you and I don't put enough energy into our work simply because we've spread ourselves too thin. And we're doing so many things that we can't really fully engage in anything we're doing or for long enough to make a difference. So sometimes we just need to narrow back and say no to some things when, some of us just like saying yes. We haven't learned that there's a 2-letter word. And sometimes we just need to say no so that we can really do the things that are really important in our life, the things that God really wants us to do well at. And Solomon reminds us of that. We also need to work in areas of our strength. John Maxwell says, work where you are the strongest 80% of your time. Work where you are learning 15% of the time, and work where you are weak 5% of the time. So given a 40-hour work week, you might spend 2 hours doing stuff that you're not very good at. And you might spend 6 hours doing things that you're just learning how to do well. And 32 hours of that doing things that you're just naturally gifted at, that you love, and that you're good at, you're strong at. Because where are you going to make the biggest impact? You're naturally going to make the biggest impact doing the things that you're strong at doing, you're good at doing. So why would you waste the majority of your time trying to become good at something you're not good at? You need to focus your life on the things where you're the strongest. Now, what are the results of hard work? Proverbs 14:23 says, all hard work brings a profit, but mere talk leads only to poverty. Albert Hubbard said, folks who never do any more than they get paid for never get paid for any more than they do. Quite a statement. Now, there's some things that are a lot more likely in our life if they're accompanied by hard work. One is success. A.L. Williams said, you beat 50% of the people in America just by working hard. Just take a minute and let that sink in. I don't care if you're running a business or running a football team or running for president. You beat 50% of people at any level, at any time, just by working consistently hard over a long time. Success is more likely with hard work. Secondly, satisfaction is more likely with hard work. Margaret Thatcher again said, look at a day when you are supremely happy with the results of that day. It's not a day that you just lounged around doing nothing. It's when you've had a lot to do, everything to do, and you've done it. When you've accomplished what you were supposed to do that day, it gives you satisfaction. Researchers followed a group of 1,500 people for 20 years. And at the beginning of those 20 years, they divided those people, 1,500 people, into two groups. Group A, 83% of them chose their work based on the income. And so they went to work because they were going to make money, and they figured later on they could do what they wanted to do, what they would enjoy doing after they made their money. Group B, only 17% of them chose a career path that they were going to do what they really wanted to do. And they were going to let money worry about itself later on in life. They were just going to give themselves to what they really wanted to do. Now, at the end of the 20-year period, 101 of those people had become millionaires. only one of the 101 were from the first group of people. 100 of the 101 were from the people that just set out, didn't worry about money. They just set out and they just gave themselves to what they really wanted to do in life. They pursued what they loved. Thomas Edison said, "I never did a day's work in my life. It was all fun." Walt Disney said, "Find something that you'd like to do so much that you'd gladly do it for nothing. Then learn to do it so well that people will pay you for it." So success, we find that more likely if we work hard. We find satisfaction more likely if we work hard. The third thing we find is significance is more likely if we work hard. Thomas Edison again said, "I never did anything by accident, nor did any of my inventions come by accidents. They came by hard work." And then Theodore Roosevelt said, "Far and away the best prize the world has to offer is to work hard doing work that is worth doing." And the last thing I want to say, the result of hard work is security. There is a certain amount of security that comes for being able to provide for our families or being able to be generous with others. All of that comes, it's more likely we'll be able to do that if we work hard. Proverbs chapter 12, verse 11 says, "He who works his land will have abundant food, but he who chases fantasies lacks judgment." And then at the end of Proverbs, in Proverbs 27, verses 25 and 27, it says, "When the hay is removed and the new growth appears and the grass from the hills are gathered in, the lambs will provide you with clothing, the goats with the price of the field. You will have plenty of goat's milk to feed you and your family and to nourish your servant girls." And so Proverbs is just reminding us on this Labor Day weekend that we should not be lazy, we should not be like sluggards, but we need to fully engage in our labor, whatever that might be. Whether we're tired or not, we need to fully engage. And it might be in relationships, it might be, in our marriage, it might, I was 34 years yesterday, and I was thinking, yeah, there's some times could have done better there. To be fully engaged, is there an area of your life where, God has called you to, but you're just kind of being lazy? And you need to step up your game. Whether that's physically, spiritually, relationally, in work, whatever it is, where's God saying you need to do a better job and pick up your game in this area of your life? And because the end result of that choice to do that, you'll become much more productive. It might be just in your prayer life of being faithful to pray for someone. Let's pray.